Sunday art talks. This is part of the exhibition we have currently on view now, Landscape of Desire. So every Sunday, throughout the duration of this exhibition, we will have anywhere from 4 to 8 artists from the show come and talk about their art, their artistic process. You'll have a chance to ask questions and just learn a little bit more about them, and so will I, so I love doing this. So today, I'm very excited to introduce 4 incredible artists to you today, and I'll start out with giving you a brief bio, and then I'll have a series of questions that we'll use as sort of a loose jumping off point. You guys are welcome to talk amongst yourselves if you have any questions for each other, and then afterwards we'll have time for you guys to ask questions. So I will start. Elena Maza. Her work is actually unfortunately behind you, but she does beautiful botanical illustrations with watercolor and colored pencils. So those are right smack dab right there. So hopefully afterwards you'll have a chance to get a better look at the artist's work. Elena Maza was born in Havana, Cuba, and came to the United States in 1961 as a result of Castro's revolution. She was living in Mexico with a foster family until her own family was able to leave and come join her. She became a resident of the Washington area, and she studied architecture at Catholic University, gaining her first exposure to the arts, working at Walter Hobbs' Washington Gallery of Modern Art. She started painting in 1970 and studied at the Corcoran School of Art. Elena studied botanical arts at Brookside Gardens School of Botanical Art and Illustration, and earned a certificate in 2015. After retiring from work as an engineering design professional, she is currently a full-time artist and teaches botanical art, and she and her husband, Herb, a writer, live in Front Royal. Local gal. All right, Joseph Gillette. Joseph Gillette is an American artist specializing in vernacular photography, so his work is here. He pursued his education in fine art and art history at American University, George Washington University, and NYU Tisch School of the Arts, graduating with a BFA degree. Nice. Mark Parascandola. His work is right behind us here. Mark Parascandola is a documentary fine art photographer. His work explores how photography and the movies shape our perceptions of history and create ambiguity between reality and make-believe. A PhD epidemiologist by training, he draws on methods of historical and public health research in investigating subjects and locations. His work has been exhibited widely in the US, Spain, and China. Mark was awarded individual artist fellowships from the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, 2014 and 2018, and was a finalist for the Sondheim Prize in 2011, and for Critical Mass, which is another prize, 2012, 2016, and 2019. His photo book, Once Upon a Time in Almera, A Legacy of Hollywood in Spain, was published by Daylight Books in 2017. The work from that project was the subject of a solo exhibition at the Embassy of Spain in Washington, D.C., and has since traveled to numerous locations. His latest photo book, Once Upon a Time in Shanghai, which is actually here, the gallery, to look at or to even purchase, documents the rapidly expanding movie industry in China. So this image is part of that. The book was awarded first place in the Documentary Book Project category in 2019 International Photography Awards, and related work was selected for the Best in Show exhibition at the Lucy Awards in New York City, October 2019. Excuse me. All right. Kerry-McAleer-Keeler. Kerry holds an MFA in printmaking from George Washington University and a BA with a concentration in studio art and politics from Mount Holyoke College. As Associate Professor of Art and Design, specializing in printmaking and book arts at the Corcoran School of Art and Design, George Washington University, she's been a dedicated faculty member since 1998. Her work is 2 images that are right behind her, the colorful, beautiful abstract. Kerry's artistic career spans numerous individual, group, and juried exhibitions across the United States and internationally. Her work is featured in prestigious book publications such as The Book as Art, Artists' Books from the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and 500 Handmade Books, Volume 2 by Lark Books. Her books and prints are housed in esteemed collections, including the National Museum of Women in the Arts, Library of Congress, Rare Books, and Special Collections, Library at George Mason University, Fenwick Library at University of California, Berkeley, and Jaffe Center for Book Arts at Florida Atlantic University's Wimberley Library. Currently, Kerry serves as the Executive Vice President for the College Book Arts Association. Furthering her commitment to the field of book arts education and practice, her contributions to academia and the art community reflect her profound dedication and expertise in printmaking and book arts. Wow, impressive crew here. Alrighty, so there we go. So the purpose of this talk is to give you a sense of each artist's process and inspiration. So what I'm going to do is just start with a basic question, and each will go ahead and answer it in their own way. So Elena, tell me about your primary medium. I believe, from what I understand, it's watercolor and colored pencil. Can you tell us a little bit about why that medium, how it speaks to you?
Well, as I said, can everybody hear me? I don't know.
Bring it up to you now.
A little closer?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Perfect.
Oh, okay. To me, the two media that I'm working on currently, and I haven't always worked in these two exclusively, I've explored other varieties of media, but these two seem to be particularly related or complementary to each other because you have to have, with watercolor as a medium, it's a little bit different from oils or when you're working with abstract. You actually have to have a pretty good idea of where you're going to put that color and where you're going to put your water, because the water is going to move that color around. And so you generally, especially with botanical art, you begin with an actual drawing underneath very lightly before you actually start putting watercolor paint on it. With colored pencils have really come of age since the time when I was a child. When I was a child, of course, Prismacolors were the standard for colored pencils, and those were great to work with, and artists still use them to create amazing works that you would swear were another medium and not colored pencil. But so those two go together very well, but recently, again, oil-based colored pencils have been developed, and these can be used together with watercolor themselves on the same piece of paper, or they can, you can sort of mix and match in effect. So that is again a great advantage, that it gives you to render what it is that you're looking for in exactitude. So that's why I chose those two especially. Both processes involve a layering of the colors. You tend to start very light, and you build up your color and your dark and your depth from just putting more and more, whether it's the watercolor or the colored pencil on the surface. So I hope, have I answered that?
I think so. So there seems to be something you said about you have to, who's that? That you have to be committed once you put it down. Is there something about that speaks to you as just a person, something about the exacting nature of it that speaks to you?
Well, with botanic art, it's been called the marriage of art and science, because botanically, in order to pass yourself off as a botanic artist, you have to actually be botanically accurate. I could not, for example, do a flower which would typically have like 5 petals. If I drew it or painted it with 6, it was obviously not be believable, and it would not be recognizable. Botanists would immediately say, "Oh, this is incorrect. This is not an accurate illustration." So that's one of the reasons. But also because generally, when you're going to develop a botanic piece, you really actually you need to sort of practice drawing the plant. to get an idea of how the light hits the leaves, the texture of the leaves, the texture of the petals. There's a lot of different elements that go into that. So everything has to be sort of pre-planned. You cannot just be spontaneous. I mean, I have done sort of Zen watercolors too, of flowers, but that is not going to give me the botanical quality that I want. That would be too loose for a botanical illustration.
Interesting. Thank you. Okay, how about you, Joe? Why photography? How does that speak to you?
Sure. I think black and white photography chose me. I didn't choose
Is it on?
Is it on? Hello?
No.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
There you go. Gotta eat the mic.
Yeah. Hey, there's my son. Yeah, black and white photography. When I first went to art school, I studied drawing, and I'd get hand cramps, and it's like, man, this is like takes forever. It hurts, and then I would end up making drawings that looked just like real life. And I'm like, then I took a photography class. I'm like, oh, this is so much easier. You can do 36 thumbnails in no time, you know. And I was born colorblind too, red-green colorblind, so that sort of eliminated me being a color artist. It's like, that has a little red cast. I'm like, really? So I couldn't control that, but black and white photography seemed like something I could manage. And then through time, I just learned composition, and, content, and balance, and harmony, and all these other things that apply to art and life and music, food, and it just sort of worked into the black and white photography. And when I was a little kid, there was black and white TV. It wasn't color TV. And then I had a baby book as a child, had little square black and white photos in it, and I just loved that. I was just like, wow, this is magical.
Especially if you couldn't see color, I would imagine.
Yes. Well, I could see color, it's not red, green, and so I just found like, all right, we'll just eliminate that from a standpoint of being an artist. Not that I don't appreciate it. I see colors in here, just some of it gets muddy, and it's like, I prefer clarity. So, yeah. So,
Interesting.
yeah. So.
All right. Thank you. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, so I'm a photographer. I work primarily in digital photography now. I mean, I started out with film, but to me, it's I like what digital photography has given me is the ability to have control of the whole process, from capturing the image to processing it to printing it. And to me, actually, I do my own printing, and to me, that's an important part of the process as well. I would say also my photography has tended to focus on sort of a series of images, built around a project. So this is from this, series I did around the film industry in China. And so also part of the process for me is actually doing a lot of research before I even go and start photographing, to try and understand kind of the story of this place and learn about the world of the movie industry in China, which to me was something very foreign when I started this project. I guess to me, photography has always been kind of a way to kind of explore the world. I've been taking photographs since I was a kid, and often kind of inspired when I was traveling or seeing a new place. And to me, it's just been part of how I've always kind of processed what I was seeing. So to me, that idea of kind of using photography as a way to explore this kind of world that to me was totally foreign was really part of what drew me to it.
And I guess being behind a camera kind of, there's a level of protection in a way. Like if you feel a little bit like a foreigner or uncomfortable, or it kind of offers that, right?
Yes, exactly. It gives you a way to interact with people, but also to stay in the background if you want to. And so I think I was able to just show up at these movie production sites in China with my sort of expensive camera, and people assume, oh, I was there for a reason. and so they would just I could stay in the background and take photographs.
All right, great. Kerry, why printmaking?
That's a really good question. I love printmaking because I love the layering process, and I like the element of surprise a little bit. But with printmaking, it's definitely about channeling and kind of controlling how much of a surprise you get at the end. It's kind of a little bit like photography, especially in the darkroom. It's kind of about kind of controlling what you want, what you envision and what you want it to be. And I love that about printmaking. That's always been something that has excited me. When I was young, actually in high school, I had a wonderful teacher. I still remember her name, Mrs. Gross, and she brought in. She was obviously a print. Well, for me, obviously a printmaker in her former years. She went to school obviously for it, because she brought all the stuff in for me because she saw that I really loved drawing. I really loved to make things that were physical, and I wanted to be able to kind of take my drawing and move it to the next level. And so she's like, printmaking is the thing for you. So she brought in all of her supplies. She set up an etching bath for me, which she went way above and beyond the Call of Duty for a high school art teacher, and I fell in love. I was like, this is for me. And then in college, that's just where I just set my course, and I was in heaven.
Found a happy place.
Yeah, high school teachers, art teachers, they're the best, especially when they have the passion, I guess, and they see it in someone else, and they want to give that gift, and it really is a gift. So, yeah.
And now you do that.
I hope I do.
Would you say it's a dying art?
Well, I do. So I specialize in leadite things, especially book arts and printmaking and letterpress and a lot of other, movable type and whatnot. But I love keeping art forms alive that are older, because there's a special thing that happens when we were just talking about it, when you give that gift to someone else and you see that spark, and it's that energy that gets you so excited. And when you see it in the younger generation and you see what they come up with, it's amazing. Yeah, so yeah, I like passing older art forms along, because someone has to, right?
Absolutely. You're a national treasure. So while I have you there, I'd like to talk a little bit about landscape, since this exhibition is called Landscape of Desire. And so in a kind of practical way, in terms of landscapes where you've either grown up or where you live, I know these images look abstract, but they're actually, I believe, based on something in your environment.
Yes.
That you may not be able to recognize. So can you talk a little bit about, in any way that you'd like, landscape or your environment influences your work?
So these prints actually developed during the pandemic and during the Me Too, situation that was happening. They're all about boiling points, and they're all about looking at things up close and from a distinct point of view, but at the same time reflecting the environment that's happening, or it still is, of course, happening around you. And so actually, my son here, Hugh, helped me develop these with creating, I'll tell you the technique, it's kind of weird. I would take a water bottle and we'd put Alka-Seltzer in it, and we shake it up. And so all of them are created actually from taking an iPhone and then directly putting it up to a water bottle and seeing what happens, and creating the boiling points based on the energy that happens within inside the bottle. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where the creative process first happened. And then when I started to look at these, I was like, wait a minute, this reflects what's going on around me right now, especially as a woman. And I just kind of wanted to chart that. And I've been doing that for about 5 years now. So that's kind of where that impetus came from.
Isn't that amazing? Like, that's why this is so important, is to hear, like, you wouldn't know all that background necessarily by looking at those images. Not that you wouldn't get a sense of something, exciting.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's fascinating. Well, great. Okay, let's move on to Mark. Can you talk a little bit about landscape that you work in, live in, and how it influences your work?
Yeah, so, I'd say landscape is very important in my work. Now, I've tended to photograph places elsewhere, not my immediate surroundings where I live and work, but to go to China or other places. But I did a previous project focused on movie locations in south of Spain, which is how I got into this whole topic of the movies and movie landscapes and movie sets. And what drew me there was partly my mother's family is from this region south of Spain, which in the 1960s and 70s in Almeria was a big center for Hollywood film production. They also made a lot of westerns there. The Italians made spaghetti westerns there. And so some of these landscapes are actually familiar to, you may not know that you've seen it, but I'm sure many of you have seen in, parts of Lawrence of Arabia or Cleopatra or the Sergio Leone films with Clint Eastwood, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. These very distinctive landscapes that from those films. But I also remember them from my childhood, from going to Spain and visiting family there, and visiting some of these old Western movie sets that really made an impression on me. So to me, I felt like I had a personal connection as well to this landscape. I think also though in the Chinese film sets, I didn't have the personal connection there, but to me I was interested in how these sort of artificial landscapes are created. They build these enormous movie sets to recreate, say, the Forbidden City or some ancient fortress or the streets of Shanghai in the 1930s, just for the purposes of making a film. And so I got also fascinated by these kind of imaginary landscapes and how they're used to represent these historic episodes in Chinese history in the movies.
Epidemiologist. How does that influence your work?
Good question. Well, so I still have a day job as an epidemiologist, epidemiology is basically sort of studying health at the population level, looking at patterns of health and disease. And so unlike, say, a doctor or physician who usually deals with the individual patient, epidemiologist tends to focus on the population to understand the causes and drivers of patterns of disease. And so to me, that's actually, I think I'm trying to do something similar in kind of telling the story of this large-scale movie industry in China, or the sort of rise and fall of the Hollywood filmmaking in south of Spain, where it's kind of telling the story of a place, not just an individual, but a place, and trying to understand what makes it tick and how does it work. And I think some of the techniques are similar too. I rely heavily on research to learn about the places I'm photographing. So it did require a lot of research to understand the movie industry in China, to find these locations, to figure out how to get access to them, and which is, I guess, is not that different from what I do as an epidemiologist.
They could just as well be cells, like all these people, looking under a microscope.
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah.
So interesting. Okay, well, thank you. Joe, how about you? Environment, landscape.
Well, for instance, these four photographs were taken while I was traveling. Two of them were in Utah, Capitol Reef area, and the two on the bottom were Kashmir, India. And I find as a photographer, you know, your daily routine, you might, unless you're, you know, that's your career, you're not taking a lot of pictures usually. But when you travel, it just seems automatic. So you're collecting a lot more images, and you're not worried about, oh, I got to pay the bills, oh, so I got an appointment at 6. No, you're just on, you know, flowing and in your environment and taking photos. And I found, particularly in India, the longer I was there, the more you were acclimated, and pretty soon you're not even thinking about taking pictures. You're just flowing and taking them. And this one at the bottom, I call it the observer. That was just like, I was watching a scene, and I turned to the right, and I'm like, oh, there's a picture. Well, then, you know, it's not till later you look at it, start breaking it down, and it's like, what makes that a good picture? Well, for, you know, obviously the landscape and the environment, but just the way that image is divided in half. Like, you've got, you know, this glorious sky, and then you have this underworld reality, or, you know, it's just, I don't know, that's the thing I love about photography, but I just feel like the environment and, you know, literally, I took these literally for landscape, it's just imbued in photography, really.
Well, also they are on location, so you're not doing, so there, it's almost like photojournalism in a way, right?
Yes.
Like, so that's a decision, you don't do setups and sets.
No. And they're usually always full frame. I don't crop anything. This bottom one, we were at a floating market, like at the crack of dawn on Lake Dahl in Srinagar. And, you know, this guy was hustling his lotus and seeds and flowers and stuff, and he ran down this gal that was in our group. And so it's just like, okay, you know. I mean, that's more my speed, is photographs of people. That's what I'm drawn to, more so than landscape. But every once in a while, it's like, wow, because, you know, a picture of the landscape versus actually being there, it's really hard to pull off with a camera, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
You're doing a good job.
yeah.
Great. Thank you, Elena.
All right. For me, I don't know that I would have become a botanical artist or even interested in plants if I hadn't grown up in Cuba. I feel very blessed that my family had a nice house with a huge backyard full of trees. And as a child, I spent most of my childhood exploring those trees by climbing them. But that made me very interested in the whole process of, flowers were my main interest. And just to tell a little story, when I was about maybe 6, I saw a flower on a tree. I was playing on my swing, and I wanted to get a closer look at the flowers, so I decided, let me see how can I figure out how to climb this tree. So I kind of pieced it in my mind and immediately acted upon it, started shooting up the tree. My mother, of course, was horrified and begged me to get down immediately, that I was going to fall and break my neck, things like that. But my dad was there on that particular occasion, and he kind of intervened and said, no, wait a minute, I think it'd be okay for her to do this. She's old enough. And then I got, a severe talking to about what I was doing was, life and death, and if I wasn't very, very careful, I could possibly die, or even worse, I could fall and become paralyzed for life, which to me would have been the worst thing, since I was a very hyperactive child. But anyway, having obtained permission, I in effect then proceeded to explore. And one of the things that I began to observe was how flowers turned into fruit, because my maternal grandfather had almost all of the trees in his backyard were fruit trees. I once asked him why he had planted all these fruit trees, and he said, well, it's because if hard times ever come upon us, and he remembered some because he had fought in the Cuban War of Independence, where mostly they starved. They didn't do too much fighting on the Spaniards in his regiment, but they had to forage for food, and he said, the trees were what saved us, that's what gave us the food. And then during the Depression in Cuba too, things got very, very hard. And but not as bad because the people in the countryside could go and they had mango trees and every kind of edible fruit. So that's why my grandfather had done that. So as I got older, I began observing how the flowers developed into the fruit. And then my grandmother enlisted me to be sort of like on the fruit watch. So I would watch to see when the fruits were ready for picking, and then I would go up and climb the tree and get them down for her. So that was sort of my first lesson in botany, and it fascinated me. So that's one of the reasons when I started learning botany, my first interest is in tropical botany because I wanted to identify which were the trees that I remembered from my childhood. In Cuba, there were a lot of, many of the same trees you would find in Miami, say, or southern Florida. Things like the flame tree, if any of you are familiar with that. It has beautiful red flowers. When it flowers in the wet season, at the beginning of the wet season, the tree is just bare, has no leaves, and it's all these flowers come, and it's just spectacular. And so things like that still inspired me, and I ended up sort of reconstructing, and that was really my first lessons in botany and learning about plant families and orders and things like that. I've never studied botany formally, but I hang out with a lot of botanists, so that's part of what informs my work. Now, currently, of course, what informs my work is the nature that surrounds us here, and with Shenandoah National Park, we have a wonderful resource, so I can go there, and if I have any questions, I've got to know the botanists there too, and I can ask her, say, oh, I'm looking for this plant because I need some field sketches, and she'll tell me, oh, I think you'd find it at mile marker, whatever. So that's sort of what inspires my work.
Do you recall your first creative act, the moment that you did something that you said, I think this is something I want to do, or that you recognized as a creative moment or gesture?
Well, I think when I was about 4.5, maybe 5, on my walks my grandparents we lived with my paternal grandparents, and my maternal grandfathers were a block away, so we would walk back and forth. We spent about equal time in both grandparents' houses, and we would pass a lot of empty lots. There I would find, my sisters and I would go in and we would pick the flowers and bring them home to, parents, grandparents, whatever. And this one day, I happened to see these beautiful grass seed heads that I thought would be stunning, and I just thought they were beautiful. I took them home, and when I got to my maternal grandparents' house, I decided that I wanted to decorate the hallway, and so I took the grasses and some Scotch tape, and I very methodically, every few paces, I taped these on both sides like a long procession. I wanted to create, in Cuba, a lot of the mansions had these long driveways, and they were always lined with palm trees. You've probably seen them. There are clubs in Florida that have this same sort of landscaping and things. So I wanted to recreate something like this with the weeds in my grandmother's hallway. Of course, when she got wind of that, she was most upset with me. And I had to pull the Scotch tape and took a bit of the paint, so she was even more upset with me. My mother kind of defended me and said, well, she had good intentions. So that was one of my first creative acts.
I love that, like guerrilla art.
It was an installation.
I love it, yeah, fantastic. All right, Joe, do you recall your first creative moment?
I actually do. There was a couple. The one based on photography, and I even brought show and tell. I have a picture.
Oh.
It was 1961. This is out of my baby book. It's the first photo I've ever taken. And what happened is I'm kind of a mischievous child, and I was horsing around. I found my parents' camera, and I'm like, hey, this is going to be cool. Click. And then I realized, they're going to develop this, and I'm going to be in trouble.
How old were you?
4. Yeah.
Can I pass this around?
Sure,
All
sure.
right, so he took this when he was 4 years old, his first work of art.
So now I was like all excited, I mean, whatever. I was sitting on the carport. I think it was a timeout for something. 30 minutes when you're 4, that might as well be, 3 years. Yeah. You're staring at the clock and it's going backwards. So anyway, I got bored. The car was there. Camera. Hey, click. I went, I better put it back. Put it back. And then I was like, I'm going to get in trouble again. But I wasn't too, I forgot about it. So timeout's over, no problem. Well, then the photo comes back, and instead of getting in trouble, my mother pasted it Elmer's glue into the baby book, and suddenly it's like Joe's first picture. It's like, wow. Now, if I'd gotten my ass whooped, I might not have liked photography. It could go either way. But then I went to Catholic school, and I remember being 5 years old at this time, or 6, something like that. And you learn cursive before you learn how to print. So just the beauty of the letters, that just fascinated me, and it still does. And my mother had excellent penmanship, and mine's gone downhill. I'm more like no offense, a doctor. But I just love the curvilinear lines and everything. So I just remember practicing my penmanship. That was like my favorite thing. Yeah.
Wow. In Montessori school, they have them in sandpaper, so you can learn with your finger.
Oh, really?
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
All right, interesting. So we're passing your photo around if you don't
Oh,
mind.
yeah. It's not a bad picture. Yeah, well, yeah.
Mark, how about you?
Yeah, so I don't know if I can remember one moment, but I did have a camera when I was very young. I don't know exactly what age I was when I was in grade school. But we also had, I remember our family had an 8mm movie camera, which I think was kind of unusual at that time. I remember my father telling me that when he grew up, his family always had a movie camera and a projector, and they would sort of watch their own family films, or you could also rent, I guess, films to play on the 8mm projector back then. And then at one point, his father, my grandfather, sold the movie projector to buy a TV. And he said that was such a disappointment because on the TV screen you have this little flickering screen which didn't really compete with the big movie screen. And also there wasn't a lot on TV at that time.
And it wasn't you on the
Yeah,
screen.
and you couldn't watch your own family films and things. And so I guess he wanted us to grow up with experiencing that. So we had this 8mm movie camera, and so I would get together with my friends, and we actually started making movies with the 8mm camera. And I don't think we ever really developed them into something because it was fun to play in front of the camera and to but then you had to get the film developed and then edit it, and the editing was the real work, and that was so I was never disciplined, at least as a kid, to do that. But that did really inspire me, and I think got me interested in both film and photography.
Is your dad still alive?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Is he proud of what you do now? Does he see the connection?
Yeah, I think he does, and we still have some of those old 8mm films,
yeah.
which I still need to go back and edit sometime into something coherent.
Fantastic. Great.
So I was a child of the 70s, and my mom was really into helping the arts. And so I remember one of my first memories of childhood and art, the art experience, is, believe it or not, I created puppets because they brought a whole group in, and we all made puppets, and it was the most exciting, really fun and creative thing I had done as a kid. And so every year my mom would she helped to do fundraising. She helped to she's not an artist herself, but she really appreciated the arts and really wanted to make sure that me and my sister experienced that, and it was very important to her. And every summer she would really help to keep this organization alive in our community and whatnot. And so I would go to the summer camp for the arts, and wow, it was just the best. I really, really enjoyed that. Yeah.
So it was nurtured early.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, yeah.
And did you say, was your mom an artist? Or
She's not actually. She's a school teacher, over 30 years, elementary school teacher. But arts was very important to her.
So when you decided to pursue it seriously, that was
Actually,
okay.
both my parents were fine with it. It's hard. It's a tough sell now.
It was the 70s.
Maybe that was part of it. Maybe that was part of it. But you know, art applies to so many areas in life, and I think sometimes parents lose sight of that. And I think it helps you grow as a person, and develop. Even if you go in as an art major, you can end up doing 100 other things, but because art helps you develop all the skills that you need for so many things in life.
Could you talk more about that? Could you speak more about either personally, how has art helped you in other areas of your life? Or as a teacher, what have you observed? Or specifically what you just mentioned, that they help in so many areas?
I think creativity is really important in any field that you go into, and learning how to play and how to be creative, because I really feel like sometimes our generation, or the generation now, doesn't have the room to play. And I think that's so important in terms of self-development, in terms of being a creative person in any field that you go into. So I feel like the arts can do that for us. And I sometimes people don't realize it's not just STEM, it's other things that need to be in play here for the person to be the active, contributing human that we need to be in life, and in any profession.
So when you are working on your projects, is there a lot of solitary time? And how would that figure into what you're talking about?
Well, that's interesting. Yes, there is a lot of solitary time, though I don't mind collaborating. I think I collaborate a lot with just springboarding ideas off of just the people that live in my house, or just fellow artists. And so I feel like that's really important, to just get another point of view, because we can live so isolated in silos, especially as artists. So it's nice sometimes when, if I'm developing an idea, I'll be like, do you get this? Like, does this communicate what I'm thinking? Or just in general. So it's important that what I'm saying hopefully resonates with someone else. However, I do love the fact that art can resonate in a different way for people. Like when we look at photos, when we look at prints, the experience is different for each person, and I love that. So it doesn't have to be exactly what I'm thinking, as long as the concept is being pushed forward and resonating with someone else in any way, in a different way.
Yeah, fascinating. So as a teacher, I don't mean to press this point, but do you notice over the years, as technology has become so prevalent, a deterioration of attention, and has art helped your students with that?
I was going to say, I think they actually, especially I'll get a lot of graphic designers in my book arts classes, especially because they're thinking about presentation and how can my graphic design forms become three-dimensional and whatnot. And I love it when they get excited because about the physicality of something. It's like the touch of creating something and developing it by hand rather than just on the computer screen is so essential. Not that I'm against the computer. I feel like there's so many great things that the computer has pushed us along and made things easier to do. But at the same time, there's still something wonderful about the tactile experience of art.
I read something kind of bleak. It said one day we're just going to have like one finger that just pushes a button. That'll never happen.
Well, let's hope it's still inky.
Yeah, right, exactly. Thank you so much. Mark, how about you? How does art in general help you in other areas of your life?
Yeah, well, so I think I maybe touched on a little bit earlier that to me, my art, in the process of my artwork does involve a lot of research as well as the sort of creative, and I think actually the research piece is creative too. You're trying to sort of follow different threads and trying to piece together a story from what's often incomplete, information. And to me, that's I think is similar sometimes in what we're doing in science too. So it's I think people tend to think of science as very sort of direct, and everything is just sort of determined by what you observe. But that's in practice, that's often not the case. We have to make inferences, based on incomplete evidence, and often piecing together sort of information from a variety of different sources to kind of basically to tell a story about what's happening in how cancer develops or how exposure to something in the environment can impact health. So to me, that's there is some creative thinking involved in trying to piece together that story, and so I find that thinking creatively in my artwork is really actually helps me in my scientific work as well.
So is it true that in science, that the observed is affected by you observing it? Like, is that any connection?
Yeah, well, that certainly can be the case, and even in epidemiology, we're relying on surveys, and you ask people a question, and by asking them a question, you can often influence what their answer is because you get them to think of something maybe they hadn't thought of before. So this is something people who design surveys always have to think about: is sort of the design of your survey influencing the answer you get back from people, and then making it less valid because of that, or less reliable. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Joe, how about you? Do you go to art when you're needing a particular vibe in your life, or how has it affected you? Moved and
I don't know if I'm that organized, but I do know, like, speaking of photography, I remember I had a professor that said, photography has 1,000 uses, but art only has one, and that's to excite your eye. I'm like, oh, okay. So, but when you see art and your eye gets excited, it takes you other places. And when you're making art, it like lowers your cortisol levels. You're suddenly doing a happy dance. You're all tingly, and you're like, whoa. And I play music too, and I've had sets of music where the whole time you're just like feeling elevated and tingling, and it's great. And then, you finish your set and you talk to people and they're like, man, I was all tingly. We were too. I was like, what, really? So, it's like this energy that you spread, and, it's like the law of attraction. If it's good energy, it like amplifies. So, I just think it's really important and good for people. And, if you don't have art in your life or music, what kind of world would that be? That's like, so I don't even want to go there. I just think it's, it's uplifting for everybody involved, really. So.
Would you say it's therapeutic at all for you?
Absolutely, yes. As we like to say, musicians sometime, after you have a rehearsal, hey, it's cheaper than therapy. Well, when you add up the cost of instruments, maybe it's not. It's certainly less, troublesome. Yeah.
Or stigmatized?
Sure. Yeah, that too. I get it. Yeah. Pay cash, it'll go on your record forever. What is that?
That should be a good thing, that you saw to your mental health.
Right, sure. So,
Yeah.
and being involved in a show like this is just, I can't believe my good luck. It's just like, wow, How'd this happen? Well, Melissa, the queen of art.
Hush, you hush.
Yeah.
Have you ever interned with any photographers that are, like, you know, working legit?
When I was in school in New York City, I was the assistant for Sylvia Plahi. She was a Village Voice photographer. She, at age 13, moved from Hungary to the United States, to Queens, and they smuggled her and her family out in, you know, underneath piles of corn in a truck. So she was an interesting lady. She went to Pratt, and you know, she's 13, doesn't know the language, so she, there's this famous Hungarian photographer, Andrei Kertész, that lived in New York City, so she befriended him, and you know, it really helped her art. But yeah, I worked with her. She's one of the best female photographers in the world, absolutely. You know, if I call her right now, she'll answer the phone. She's turning 80, so she's not as spry as she once was, but what a wonderful person. It's just like, God, if I could only take one photo like her. She was just, her work's amazing. It's Plachy, Sylvia Plahi. Yeah. And then I auditioned for Richard Avedon. He was looking for an assistant at one point, but I was deemed too old. So didn't get that job.
Meanwhile, what, you were like 19 or something?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Your
whatever.
jeans weren't tight enough.
I don't know. Some of them. Yeah. But
All right, cool. We went down a road there.
oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, sorry about
We could
that.
talk for hours.
Yeah,
Elena,
Well, it sounds like you're a photographer friend, and I have very parallel stories, because at the same age that I was when I came to the States, I had a great advantage that I did know English because my parents had sent me to a bilingual school in Cuba, so we had learned all along. I did not have a language barrier to struggle with. But other than that, I would say, getting back to the question, art has been a form of therapy for me, and I think it is not just for me and a lot of other artists, but I think it's a form of therapy for almost everybody. It's what helped me to keep my sanity during the worst periods when I first came to the States. I found myself alone, away from my family, in an unfamiliar culture with strangers, and too young to really be able to do much about it. So that helped me a lot. That and music were the things that helped me to get through that very difficult period. But since then, too, I'm remembering my first day. There's always that shock when you're a young person just getting out of college and you go for your first real job, right? And I was going to be a draftsman in an architect's office. And my first day there, of course, it's a shock to anyone that, you know, in college you have so much freedom because you're in a class for maybe 2 or 3 hours at the most if you're in a studio class. And then you go on and you do something else, and you have all this freedom of movement. All of a sudden you're stuck at a job, 9-to-5 job, and you have to be there and focus for 8 hours a day with only a short lunch break. And so I went home that first day, and as I was falling asleep, you know, generally when you're in that state, your mind, there are images that come to your mind. And usually something that's related to that day. And all I could see were straight lines. We were still drafting by hand in those days, you know. And I will say that also, as an aside, being a draftsman for the first 15 years of my professional life helped me a great deal because it helped me to develop my sense of touch with drawing. But anyway, that first night, I was in such a shock. I said, I don't want to see a straight line ever again in my life. And yet I know I'm going to have to for the next, you know, for the rest of my working life, because this is what architects deal in, right? So I immediately started making art during my spare time as a sort of an antidote to that very linear, sort of rigid environment of an architect's office. So that has been a big help to me.
That's so interesting. your work is so about the hand. Can you talk a little bit about technology and advances in technology? Have you embraced any of that? Is it not part of your practice? How do you feel?
Oh, no,
about it?
no, no, the technology has been a great help. Not just in, you know, I don't do a lot of social media because but technological aids, for example, photography. Most of us now have our own digital camera with the phone, right? I generally don't carry my phone. I actually left it at home today, forgot. But whenever I'm anywhere that I see a plant that I like, you know, I take a photograph of it and then I start investigating. When I'm working with my paintings, a lot of times, I mean, the way I was trained at Brookside, and most instructors will tell you, you need to have the live specimen in front of you. The photography is great, but it will not give you all as you see, because light can fade, certain things can go out of focus in certain areas. You're not going to get a 100% accurate idea of something like a plant, which has so much detail in it, from just a photograph. But of course, specimens generally only last, you know, at best, even refrigerated and in water, you might be able to keep it for a week. And after that, what do? Are you going to wait another year to complete your paintings? Well, I'm not quite that hard-edged, so at that point I have to rely on the photographs that I've taken, and that's what allows me to put the kind of detail that I want in my paintings in there. So digital photography has been great. The other thing that's great is having scanners. I use my scanner to scale up or scale down drawings. Say I may start with a drawing at a certain scale, and then I realize, oh no, I either don't have the relationship of the plant to the environment correct, or whatever it is, I need to scale it up or I need to scale it down. So instead of having to do the old-fashioned, you know, grid that you translate it as, says using your scanner and your computer, you can scale it up or down to any size you want. So that's also a great thing. To record and archive your work, having a computer is almost indispensable these days. A digital camera is also very, very necessary. So, and then of course, well, I do have two websites. I have a blog and I have a website. My blog is a more sort of freewheeling, because I grow a lot of the plants that I depict. So my blog is really more sort of a gardening blog, you know, where I record what I'm doing in my garden, or my excursions looking for different plants and things like that.
Great.
So I have that, and then I have a more professional website where, you know, if people wanted to buy work, they can go see what they got, and it's, you know, got prices and things like that.
Okay, great. Excellent. Joe, how about you? Are you resistant to?
Not so much resistant, because I feel like it's already infiltrated my work and our lives so much. I mean, I was talking to a photographer friend last week, and he's like, well, you know, the best camera is what? It's the one that you have with you, so. Here's mine, come on out of there. You know, it's this device with 3 lenses that can take pictures in the dark, and it's just amazing. I've taken pictures, and then you're like, what's happening to the camera? All of a sudden it does all this weird stuff, and it's like, wow, that image turned out nice. And so I feel like it's already, you know, it's taken my predisposition, or, you know, there's certain styles I like, and it's enhanced it without me doing anything. You know, just like Siri, how do you get to, you know, this address, and next thing you know, it's showing up in your advertising. I don't know. I feel like it's too late. We already got it. So, you know, I think it's a good thing, but I also think it can put people out of work. Like I've seen last year, there was a AI photograph that won a national competition. Yeah. And then once he won, he goes, oh, by the way, that's AI. I didn't take that picture. I'm like, what do you mean? You know, so it was a beautiful picture. So, you know, if you're creating things of beauty, it's pretty amazing. If you have no artistic talent whatsoever and you just hit a couple keywords, that's kind of cheating a little bit, you know? It's like, all right, wait a minute here. So, you know, you got to put in the work, but at the same time, I feel like it's elevating everybody's lives, you know, until some evil person misuses it. The next thing you know, I saw this video and I'm convinced it's the truth. Maybe it's not, you know. So.
Do you have any nostalgia? I know you admire Sally Mann, a photographer in Lexington, Virginia,
Yes.
who has worked a lot with, I don't know the process, sepia, kind of, they used in the Civil War, like on-site.
Right.
What is that? I'm not
I
sure.
think some of it-
Daguerreotype?
Yeah, I think that's right.
well, it wasn't,
Silver iodine?
I think
yeah,
so.
yeah, it was, she used bromide and things like that, glass plates that she would make, you know, treat and then take them out in the field. Yeah, she's amazing. I was traveling down through the valley one year on my motorcycle like 30-some years ago. I'm like, oh, Sally Mann lives in Lexington. It's lunchtime. So I stopped on my motorcycle. You know where Sally Mann lives? Go down the corner, turn left. Okay. So I went over and knocked on the door. Well, I met her husband first. He had this blacksmith shop right next door. And yeah, going in, she's in there. So I talked to her. I met all her kids when they were still young and being photographed. Had lunch with her. It was great. I was on my way. And then, like, I don't know, less than a year later, I wrote her a letter. Hey, I'm looking for another gig. Can I be your assistant? Well, you know, she sent me back a letter, and you know, things were lining up, and that I had met my wife Susie at the time, and then next thing you know, we're going to have a baby. So it's like, okay, see you, Sally. But yes, she prints all her own stuff. She uses ancient methods by today's standards, and her stuff's incredible. I don't know if you all know Sally Mann's work, but she has levels and levels of, you know, she's very intelligent, she's intellectual, she was raised by an intellectual father, was a country doctor, and her work is like at a whole nother level. I'm like, well, yeah, I took a good picture, well, let's talk about it. It's like, you know, whereas she writes books about it, you know, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, so.
Yeah, edgy too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she's a troublemaker.
In the best way.
Yeah, yeah.
So her latest project, well, there's been more, but probably her most famous latest is the Body Farm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she went to a forensics place where they study how flesh decomposes. It's like literally a place, that's what they do for forensics. And so she photographed all these bodies, and it was called What Remains. And poignant, but not for everybody, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, so I think it's in Kentucky, and you die, and oh, you want to be cremated? No. You want to be buried? No. Just chuck me out on the yard and watch me decompose, and you know, and her photographs are amazing, but I'm like, I think I want to do that. Of course, family members are horrified when they got a body. What are we doing? Why would they choose this?
Well, it's useful so that they can,
Yeah,
you know, determine somebody's,
right.
you know, cause of death or time of death.
But it's also a natural, you know, way of going. I kind of like that. Oh, you want to be? No, I burnt my fingertip. It hurt. You're going to burn my whole body down to dust and bones? I don't know. And being raised Catholic, it's like, you don't want to go to hell because you're going to get burned. So I don't know. It's like, why would I do that to myself?
So you're like a sheet in the ground kind of guy?
Yeah, well, or just chuck me on the surface and let the buzzers get me, spread me around.
My dad used to say, stick a bone up my
Yeah.
beep and let the dogs drag me away.
Oh, yeah.
A very sentimental thing. Might be healthy, I don't know.
Yeah. So,
All right, well, technology. Mark, talk to us about, are you afraid of AI? And mid-journey and things like
So,
that?
yeah, well, first I was going to say, as a scientist, I feel like I should donate my body to science because I hadn't really gotten to the point of thinking of making a plan yet. But Yeah, so for me, technology has been incredibly helpful to my process. So I did start out working in film, but now shoot all digitally. And to me, what technology has done is given me control over the whole process, from capturing the image to working with it to making a print, and so that has been enabled me to do so much that I couldn't have done otherwise. I think it's still the challenge with all, we're now sort of inundated with images on Instagram and now with AI, with sort of manufactured images that I think it's kind of overwhelming, and the danger is that we're kind of diluting diluting the impact of what
And the
images can
ability
have.
to discern, like, what's man-made.
Well, yeah, exactly. Or to discern, but I think to me it makes it even more critical to have kind of the artist's vision involved. So it's not just about an individual image, but about kind of sort of a vision that the artist has. Perhaps trying to tell a story through a series of images in a coherent way. I don't think that's something that AI can do yet, anyway.
From a human point of view, in that moment, as a record of that time, essentially, which you can only get through a human who's experiencing it, right?
Yes, exactly. I think, in my own work, I am trying to sort of tell a story that I think it's not just not just a collection of individual images. And the kind of thinking about how do you sort of organize and sequence that story, how do you, it's not something I think that yet we can do with, that AI does yet, so.
Yeah.
And personally I find, I see a lot of the AI generated images that to me, I don't find all that compelling yet. Maybe over time they'll get better, but
Okay.
that's my view.
How about you?
I'm scared of AI. I'll be honest. Only because I agree with what you were saying, Mark, where I haven't seen too much art yet that I'm like, you can definitely discern that it's AI. And so for me, especially as a printmaker, I'm like, okay, whatever. But I think the more it steals from all of us, the more it's gonna get better. So that's the part that scares me a little bit. However, I do love technology. I do love Photoshop. I think it's made my life so much easier. So like the images that I created over there, I definitely color separated into process color. So, and then what happens is you print each color on top of the next one. So, in terms of yellow, magenta, cyan, and then black. And I love that it can help me with that. Before I'd have to take it to a lab, have them create the film. I can do all of that in-house now. So I love that it's sped up all of that process, especially because I love screen printing. And screen printing and photography go hand in hand. So, that's made life so much easier. And then my iPhone, I love that I can create these images just by playing. What I like to do with technology is see where can I push it, where can it be different, and how can I use that to accelerate some kind of inspiration in my head and see where it goes. So I love that it's right there in your pocket. It's right there on your computer. You can make it all happen now without having to do so many extra steps that we used to have to do so much extra steps, especially photography and printmaking. And instead we can do some, facilitate that so much just in-house now, which is great.
Yeah. And you have the best of both worlds because you've got the technology piece and then you've got the handmade.
Right, and that's why I love technology, that they can come together in so many different ways. And again, like you can push what technology does in different directions, but still using it to what you need, and what you need to happen at your fingertips, and that's really great.
Great. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I think what we'll do is take a moment to let the viewers, our audience here, ask any questions that you would like. If you've been inspired by anything said, if you have any questions, be great.
I have a question.
Hi.
So, Mark, I was wondering, when you, for street style photography, when you're going over to China, and you're in front of people, when you take a photo, do you have a fear when you're like, I guess you have a little bit of tension, but at the same time, you have a fear like when you might face someone that doesn't like it, or any type of confrontation, for instance?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, so generally, I think the situations I'm taking photographs in. So, for example, this photograph was taken sort of around a movie set where there's already a lot of photography going on, and so I think it didn't seem so out of place. I don't do as much street photography, but I know there are street photographers who just, go out on the street, photograph people, sometimes get right up in their face, and that can be very confrontational. Personally, I don't know if I would feel comfortable doing that, because I tend to be, I think, a little more reserved, as but yeah, to me, it's something I'll often talk with people if I'm taking photographs around the film set. Talk with the extras there, try and learn what I can from them, and that kind of develops a little bit of rapport too, and makes it a little more natural to be taking photographs.
Thank you.
Mark, I was wondering why everyone is dressed the same. Is that common in China on set?
Well, I think because they're all extras. This was like a 1930s Shanghai gangster film. So there are kind of a few genres that you tend to see over and over again in the film and TV industry there. One of the popular kind of settings is to have these movies that are set in 1930s under the Japanese occupation in Shanghai, when there was also a lot of illegal activity and gangsters and all that. And so I think that these guys are all supposed to be like, gangsters all dressed in black from that period.
So,
Yeah.
to be clear, they're on their lunch break.
Yes, exactly.
These are all
Yeah.
actors, right?
Yeah.
Just having lunch.
So yeah, they were on break at the time. So, but to me, that's kind of what's intriguing about it is you wouldn't know just by looking at it kind of what the story is behind this and why are they all dressed in black and what are they doing?
It's very intriguing.
But that's part of the story that you're telling with the photograph.
Yeah, well, exactly. I wanted to show kind of behind the scenes too what's happening, and kind of this idea that the movies are creating this fiction, but this is kind of letting you see behind that.
Yeah.
It's also kind of inviting you to pick out what's different about them, right? They look the same. And that's also a cliche about certain cultures that, they
Yeah.
tend to look more alike.
Yeah.
So, it forces you to which is very scientific to me. It seems to kind of still go back to that, like to point out the anomaly.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Anybody else?
One more. I was wondering how you entitle your work. Do you tend to romanticize your titles, or do you use a scientific method, or just numerals and so on?
That's a good question. I think it's like I told Doug earlier, oh, nice shirt. Never miss an opportunity to get dressed up when you can. Well, I feel the same way. You take a photograph, because I have a background in graphics and drafting and all that sort of thing. And so word and text, they go together just like peanut butter jelly, bread and butter. So that's one of the great joys I get when you take a photograph. Okay, I got a photograph. I'm proud enough. This is good to share. And what are you going to call it? It's like, wow, yeah, this is going to be great. And then if you come up with a good title, it really, it sends it in a different direction. Like this bottom left one's called The Observer, which, that's what she's doing. I mean, the whole backstory, I could go on for a while, but I mean, there's a lot of people in this world, different styles, and a lot of people observers, other manifestors, you know.
Well,
other
who's
people.
the observer, you or her?
Well, that's a good, see, that's how that worked. I felt like she was the observer, but then of course we are too, you know, so it's pretty magical.
Mm-hmm.
This one's called Lotus. You know, the lotus is sort of the star of the show.
The space between
Hoodoos,
is
yeah.
the star
Sure,
of the
sure.
lotus in her hand.
Yeah, yeah. And this one is Zunk, Craig Zunk. He's a local dentist. I was hiking out west with him, but that's what he goes by, Zunk, Z-U-N-K. And, you know, so that's a little just more personal. It could have been, it's also, you know, place and time, so the year, but that's Navajo Point. Well, it's not really Navajo Point, but I like the sound of that. So Navajo Point's off in the distance somewhere, but I'm like, oh, it's close enough.
Kind of see it.
Yeah, so it's, again, back to what she said about being playful. That's where you really get to be playful with your photography is, you know, you could come up with a number of names, but some just, oh, that's it, that's the one.
So not a fan of Untitled.
No, I think that's a cop-out. It's like, come on, man, okay. You could have picked something. Of course, if it's wrong, then you probably should have stuck with Untitled.
I got a question. The photographers, have you ever had an instance where you thought you missed a shot? Like you missed a shot, like for example, you know, Joe, your picture with the guy kind of reaching out with his hand. What happened if you would have waited and his hand was down? Your picture would look different, right? It would have a different
Yes,
meaning.
yes.
But also how digital's actually kind of helped you mitigate that because you can just continue to shoot, right? And you can see it instantaneously.
Yes,
And knowing that you maybe missed a shot where you can recapture something, right?
correct,
So
correct.
I guess my question to you, have you had an instance where you actually thought, damn, I missed that shot?
Oh yeah, that happens all the time. I told Artie Drago one time, the Karate King down
There
the
you go.
street, you know, when I was shooting film, I was like, I'm happy if I get one really great picture a year. He's like, those are terrible batting averages. You know, but 12, 20 years go by, you got 20 great pictures, you know, but now with digital, obviously you can do a lot, you know, better. I haven't done the, you know, the blast where you take 1 million pictures because I had a friend do that once with my phone, and it's like 300 pictures in like 30 seconds, and it's like, all right, we picked out a good one, but it took like 30 minutes to delete the rest of them. So, but yeah, it's a dance with photography. 1 minute it's perfectly in balance, and most of the time it's not. You have a lot more like, not good photos. It takes a lot to get a really good one. But when you're in the zone, sometimes one evening you'll get 4 or 5 pictures. And to me, it's like, wow, that was like one of the greatest days of my life. Yeah, so,
And then it's hard to decide which one was the best.
well, that's where editors come from, you know, or come into the picture. It's really, with photography, it's nice to have another set of eyes for somebody. Because, you know, we're all telling stories, but then the viewer has their own stories they bring to it. So it's pretty fascinating, the layers.
Good question. Kerry?
Yes.
So I'm very interested in the bookmaking aspect of your art making. So are you still creating books? And
What drove me to book arts is I wanted to make printmaking more three-dimensional. I love printmaking, don't get me wrong, but it's always so flat. And so I was kind of inspired by the idea of how can I take my printmaking and make it more three-dimensional. So yes, I still do a lot of book art structures, not just traditional books, but a lot of kind of visual narratives, I like to call them. So that kind of tell a story just by glancing at the piece itself. I really get excited about boxes and box elements. So a lot of times, I teach actually a course in just that. how can you take the box and transform it into, you know, something else? A lot of my pieces relate to pushing the boundaries of what a box can do.
So it's a sculpture.
Yes, yeah. I call them visual narratives or book objects, or but a lot of people do define them as sculpture. Yeah.
So do you use found objects in
I
this?
do. Yeah. So anytime I go on a trip, my husband can tell you it's really annoying. I will pick up paper in random places and weird objects and bring them home. Yes, in my suitcase everywhere I go. Yeah. I love a good. I wouldn't call it. I love it. Not a tag sale, but I love a good what do they call it?
Antique, they call it.
Antiques, yeah,
Yard
antique
sale.
fair. But
Yeah.
let's be honest, it's probably more like a tag sale. But anyways, yeah, no, I think and then it actually starts giving me fodder for what the piece is going to be about. It's because a lot of the times, most of my pieces are about memory, but memory that's kind of distorted, not in actual and not in real time, but like what it can be, the potential of memory. The objects kind of help to push that narrative along for me when I'm then creating.
Hi.
A fairly commonly heard rule, if you will, in landscape composition is the rule of thirds, and one of the corollaries of that is don't put your horizon in the middle. Is it coincidental that the horizon in each of those 4 photographs are very close to the middle of the photograph? And is that a theme that you, other than these 4 photographs, seem to explore?
That's a great question. I'm very conscious of the rule of thirds. Most of these are squares, so it's a tic-tac-toe grid behind it. And I almost always try to hit where those things cross somewhere in my composition, because it builds a strength that, takes a snapshot to another level, per se. So I don't know if these are great examples. Maybe the one down here, even though it's split in the middle, the observer with the young lady standing, I think that is pretty close to one of the vertical thirds of that kind of thing. But that's something I always paid attention to because I have a background in graphics and drafting and blah, blah, blah. But when I learned to photograph initially, I wouldn't so much look in the middle because I knew that was, don't go there. I would look around and see how the image was touching the frame. So I was more interested in that. And then as time went by, I paid more attention to the harmony and balance of, the rule of thirds, just like foreground, middle ground, background, alliteration, what you would have in a meal. You've got the appetizer, the meal, the dessert, that kind of thing. All that, same thing in English or any language. That's what really makes things more beautiful. So if something's stuck in the middle, I wasn't paying attention. I made a mistake. But yeah, so you're just looking for balance and a strong composition, and that's what separates one image from 1,000. It's like, look at that one, it just sings. Why does it do that? I don't know. It's a sort of know. You're kind of guessing, but it's you see it everywhere in here. These people really grind on that. And, that's why it's really great exhibition. It's not smack dab in the middle. Yeah.
To the left.
Yeah.
How about you, Mark? What is your thought about composition in photographs?
Yeah, so I would say, to me, it is very important. So some of the images in the book are sort of empty scenes of, sort of photographing the architecture of the movie sets. And those I've sort of approached in a more sort of direct way. And I spend a lot of time sort of setting up the composition. I think when you have people in the photographs and movement, you don't have control over all that. And so sometimes, and so to me, I think to go back to the other question earlier about missing the shot, to me, patience is really, I found is really essential in photography too, because sometimes you have to, you have to kind of wait for things are moving around and wait for the right moment till the composition lines up. And so I'm also often trying to look for those, moments as well. And often that means just kind of watching and waiting and being around until you, and trying to figure out, look for the composition.
Interesting. Great, thank you. Anybody else? Question? No? All right. Well, thank you guys. That was enlightening. Thank you all for coming. And if you have some time, take a look at their work a little bit closer now that you know the background. And come back next Sunday. We'll have another talk with a different group of artists. Thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.